Hey y'all, and welcome back to Real Talk with Dr. LaWanda Hill. I hope you have been as eager as I am to dive into part 2 of this conversation with intimacy in our bodies, moving more into self-exploration and self-pleasure. I feel like a very important message that I want you to get from this part of the conversation is that pleasure, enjoying our bodies for the sake of just enjoying our bodies, is a birthright. It is sacred, it is divine, and we are here to talk about all the ways in which it is. And so I am excited for us to hop into part 2 of this conversation. And Eliza gives us some amazing tips and tools to be able to begin our process of self-exploration and self-pleasure, and also encourages us that if we have histories of trauma and traumatic experiences, to seek professional help on this journey of becoming a higher version of ourselves. Now we're talking about the importance of that intimacy as it relates to sexual pleasure, because oftentimes when we think about intimacy, our minds automatically go to sexuality sometimes. And I think that that is a part of intimacy, but it's not the end all be all. So now we've reached this part of the conversation where I think is important to talk about. And we kind of like left off on that with the first part of this conversation where you begin to talk about sensuality, right? And so you were talking about sensuality in the sense of being a sacred practice to restore intimacy with yourself, but not necessarily sexuality. So when you think about sensuality and sexuality, which is something that gets confused and mixed up all the time, where do you feel is the main distinction and how are they interconnected? Because I do think that they're distinct, but I also think that they're very interconnected.
Yeah. So sensual is being able to experience pleasure by way of my senses that may not involve my sexual parts, right? Like that I can experience pleasure outside of, a sexual experience, right? So I think, yes, sensuality can very much be part of our sexuality and what sweetens the deal, right? But you can have one without the other also, because I can also have a sexual experience without it being sensual.
Right. So Eliza is all the things, energy healer, psychotherapist, but also a sex therapist. And so I would imagine that helping people really understand themselves and their senses and what brings them pleasure is often your first stop when you're talking about what could enhance pleasure with somebody else. And so I'm curious, like, is that constantly what you see, or is that common in what you see? And do people automatically think that the answer is going to come outside of them? Or do you feel like people really recognize that the answer is really inside of them, and it's about having that awareness to increase pleasure that comes externally?
A lot of what I see, in particular, when I am working one-on-one with women, with vagina owners, right? Is because of how we're socialized. It is very much in that my sexuality or my pleasure, my pleasure is not always even part of the agenda, right? My partner's pleasure is part of the agenda, primarily in heterosexual relationships, because, studies have shown time and time again, when it is a lesbian relationship, for example, they experience pleasure a lot more.
They're not shortage of orgasms at all. Right? They're like, that's a heterosexual problem.
Yeah, that's a heterosexual thing. I'm sorry for y'all. Right. So, and that is because so much of when you're growing up, it's not your pleasure doesn't belong to you. Pleasure doesn't necessarily belong to you. It is not something that you're encouraged to pursue. Right. So, and again, our bodies can often be a source of pleasure for somebody else, else's viewing pleasure, for somebody else's physical pleasure, sexual pleasure, but rarely am I allowed to be sexual for me.
Wow.
For me, because it feels good to me, right? So what happens is there's a disconnect. And what we learn, or how we're socialized, is that your partner will let you know. Your partner will let you know, and your pleasure will be something that you can experience with a partner. And so we don't always even have the agency over our bodies, right? Wow. You think about, again, not even being given the proper names of our genitals, right? So my body doesn't belong to me. So
Mhm.
there's this expectation that my partner's going to know, or they should know.
What you said really, I don't know, it really, really bothers me because I know that it's so common and it's so true. It's like my body, and it kind of goes back to part one of our conversation where we were talking about our bodies not being viewed as sacred, but as a mechanism and a machine to produce and to create capital. But my body is not a mechanism of pleasure for me. It doesn't belong to me. It's for everybody else. Everybody else is viewing pleasure, touching pleasure, penetrative pleasure. And not for me, right? Of all things. And so when we're talking about restoring intimacy with ourselves and our bodies, I really want for women to, and Black and brown women specifically, to understand that pleasure can be for us. And that's it, for our soul benefit.
Yeah.
Because our body is sacred and it does belong to us. And it is not just a conduit of pleasure for other people.
Right. And that you can experience pleasure just for you, right? Like, oh, I will even have women who struggle even with the idea of self-pleasuring, masturbation. One, whether it's shame or almost feeling like they are cheating somehow on their partner by experiences on their own. And so again, there are so many messages that we get that say your body doesn't belong to you. I mean, even if you think about, so we think, let's go back to the sensuality piece. So think about the conversations that you've had and think about the messages that you hear. So in recent years, there's been a lot of like teaching women how to have like these striptease dances and learn how to striptease for your partner, or learn how to, work the pole for your partner, spice things up. Very rarely is that like for me.
Right. Because
Right.
I enjoy that, because I appreciate it, because that's a good stress relief for me. It's like, you're right. Even the messaging is not subtle. It's very bold. It's very direct. It's not about you. It's about somebody else.
Right. Or even, okay, so tying back in the energy piece, how do we start to cultivate more of that sexual energy? So if you remember, I said the second chakra was just about 2 inches below your belly button. This is our sacral energy. So a lot of our sexual energy is in our hips, right? So again, think about our ancestors, think about the dances, think about even like the dances today, right? Where it's seen as sexual or vulgar or what have you. But no, there was a knowing that this energy that we're creating in our bodies was sacred. Right. So you still see it in a lot of the dancing today. But how can I do that and it just be for me because it feels good? Right? Get that energy moving in my body.
If you see anybody on the dance floor, you're gonna see that across cultures, right? I see it a lot in Nigerian culture as I'm thinking about it. I've seen it in Ivorian culture. I certainly see it in Black American culture, of like just kind of, moving your hips and your body, because that energy is there. And that is not necessarily sexual or to bring pleasure to somebody else, but because we enjoy it. And that is something that you are appreciating. Wow, I didn't think about it like that.
Yes, absolutely. So going back to your question, is a lot of it is even understanding what feels good to my body. There's often a disconnect of, I don't even know what feels good to my body. What do you mean? I can actually explore that and it's not nasty and it's not dirty. And it doesn't mean that I'm desperate, right? So a lot of the times what is blocking us from our pleasure is the messaging that we and even exploring it.
Right. Because the messaging pops up. It's popping up. I'm desperate. This is sinful. This is wrong. I'm not supposed to do this. It's not supposed to be for me. So I can't explore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we don't even get to the act a lot of the times. There's shame with the act, but there's shame in even just the exploration. I say this a lot in that we are born sexual beings. And it's like, what does that mean? That sex is just on your mind when no, it means we have sexual body parts.
Yeah.
We have that respond to touch.
Yeah.
Right? That activate a certain type of energy. Sexual energy is life force energy. Literally, right? How did you get here?
That energy is life force energy. That's good.
It is.
And it's there. It's there.
Because our parents they had sex, right? And so sexual energy is life force energy. It is creative energy. And this is why it is essential to our well-being to be able to experience life force within me at any age. And whether I'm partnered or I'm solo, I have to be able, if I'm going to live in optimal state and be fully alive,
Yeah.
right? I have to be able to experience life force energy.
Right.
So cultivating opportunities for that in my life and embracing it and knowing that it is part of my birthright. How do I know? Because I was born being able to experience it.
Right.
But understanding that if I am here, it is because I am still in life form.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
sex,
that pleasure belongs to me, that I should be able to pursue it, that it is my right to have, and it is my right to explore and cultivate, what that feels like over and over and over again, and not just wait on someone or something or other people to be able to bring that to me. Like it's mine and it's sacred, and it's something that is intimate to me. It's something that I share with myself.
and it's an aliveness that happens that we can then take. So it's creative energy also, right? So there's, in addition, there being a lot of health benefits to being sexual and having sexual pleasure and orgasms and all that great stuff, is that it's creative energy, right? There is a certain opening also that happens within my body when
Yeah.
I am able to experience pleasure, when I'm able to experience orgasm, right? There's an opening that happens, and openness and vastness, and that is all, again, what is necessary to live this really full creative life where I am continuing to show up in these different spaces. But I have to be able to experience pleasure. And I
Yeah.
have to be able to do that in a way that I am not restricted by shame and by rules and conditioning.
That's
This is
so
why,
good. That's
yes,
so
this
that
is
I
why we
have.
were cut off from it.
Right. And I feel like that too was a mechanism of control, so that I can control
Absolutely.
your well-being, I can control your optimal state, I can control what bring. Oh my God, it's so sickening to me the ways in which oppressors, their insatiable desire to control other people's lives and well-being and sense of play. It's just insatiable and it's sickening when you
Yep.
think about the levels to it. It is very sickening.
Part of why I do the work that I do is because I feel that a lot of the times we can sort through a lot of these different areas of our life, but sex will often have this great hold over our lives. And the restriction and the shame that we feel around our sexuality, around sex, can really limit and impact our lives, right? And so again, there is a reason why women who were sexual and embraced it were pursued and called witches, or were shamed or cast out. Because if I am in my power and I own all of me, you can't own me. You can't have control over me. Your shame does nothing for me, right? But there are systems that were built upon shame, and a
Yeah.
lot of it is around sexual shame also.
Yeah. And that shame will have a grip like
The
none
control.
other, that guilt, right? Or that punitive nature. When I think about Christianity and I think about specifically religious dogma, like the punishment
Yes.
for pursuing something and spinning the narrative as opposed to it being a gift to you, which it is, something that you should enjoy and makes you feel alive. I'm now going to put restrictions on by under which conditions you can experience it, and to what degree you can. And then I'm going to tie a message of punishment to it for you. So if
Absolutely.
it's not shame, it's punishment, it's guilt, it's fear, all these control mechanisms that I don't believe God intended to be part of the messaging.
Because if I can control you mentally through shame, so anytime somebody is trying to shame you, ask yourself, why are they trying to control me? What are they trying to control? What about me are they trying to control? They're trying to manipulate me into feeling something so that I do something that they want.
That
So
part.
shame is how people get controlled. So if I can't physically enslave you anymore, how can I
Mm,
mentally enslave you?
that's
How can I
good.
control you in that way?
Let's start there, right? Because if you we know that there's still sex trafficking and things going on, but people may not be physically enslaved, but we're still cognitively enslaved and emotionally enslaved when we're thinking about shame and guilt. And so I want to do, in the same way that we talked about 3 sacred practices to restore intimacy with our bodies, I want to think about 3 tools or tips to kind of break that mental control over self-exploration and self-pleasure, because I do believe it is just that, it's a mechanism of control to keep us disconnected, to keep us from having our agency, to keep us from living the full and abundant life that we were created to have. So it feels like we got to target shame, fear, and guilt to be able to undo that. So what are your 3 tools to target those messages of control, or those messages of mental control that keep us locked up and disconnected from that?
So the first part is the awareness. Think about this. If shame is how we control people, and if when I am being sexual, I am at my freest. I have to allow myself to be at my freest when I'm experiencing orgasm. That there is a freedom, there is an openness, there is a letting go, right? So control is contraction and openness is expansion. Right? So our sexuality and sexual pleasure allows us to expand. Being aware of some of the shaming messages that are in your life currently, that maybe you're aware of, but you're not even fully aware of just how much they continue to impact you. So what were the direct messages or indirect messages that you got growing up around sex? What did you learn about sex? I'll often ask clients, how do you define, or what comes to mind when you think about a sexual woman?
That's so good. That's good. What are the messages? Like, what are the images? What's the schema?
What do you think of when you think of a woman who owns her sexuality and who is sexual? And sometimes, people be embarrassed to be like, oh, I kind of think she's a hoe, right? Or she's loose, or she's this or that, or whatever. So it's like, okay, if you think about, and that's what we're conditioned to believe, right? We're not exempt from these messages that impact us. Then how do I bridge the gap with that disconnect of, in order for me to fully embrace my sexuality and call myself a sexual woman or an unapologetic sexual woman, then there's a part of me that thinks that is actually a bad thing.
So what I'm hearing you say is be aware first, but second, now we got to challenge the story. If the message that's coming up is that's a bad thing, I need to be aware that, oh, wow, that's that shame conditioning coming up. How do I challenge this story? I'm going to go back and listen to Dr. Hill and Lisa, and I'm going to replace that with another narrative that this is an opportunity to expand, or this is my birthright, or this is something that I have agency over, and challenge that. Because once you, I hate to sound CBT, but once you begin to challenge that narrative, then that gives you room for a different emotional experience, which may open you up to explore.
You're working through that. You're like, yeah, that's not going to have a hold on me anymore. And so now what I would say is bringing your awareness to what happens to you physically. If you don't have a partner and you begin to explore your own body, self-pleasure. So what happens when you are touching yourself, right? And maybe not even in a sexual way, like maybe in a sensual way. I'm touching my arm. I am looking at myself naked in the mirror. To your body and notice what reaction you're having. Right? What's the reaction that I'm having to this? Because your body's going to start giving you clues. Ooh, this is dangerous. This is not safe.
Oh, that's good.
So when you get that message, this is where our grounding is going to happen, right? Like, okay, I've on some level learned that this is a dangerous thing to do, maybe because it is shameful. And so I'll be cast out of the tribe, right? Or whatever else, or if it's like this religious thing, I'm going to be cast out, of like the eternal damnation. If those are your beliefs, those are your beliefs. Now, I think what happens is we have to see, does that still work for me?
Right.
Does that still work for me? But okay, so we could bring it back to the body.
Yeah. Ground myself,
Slow it
center
down. I gotta
myself.
start to slow myself. And I have to start breathing and slowing it down, because what I have to do is give my body the message, actually, it's safe. This is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And my body starts to say, oh, okay, this is okay.
Right.
This is
And
okay.
you get that different pairing because you can pair now a new message because we talked about that body does keep the score. So your body kept that internal message, that earlier message. This is shameful. This is fearful. This is going to get me cast out. We now have to respond to a threat. But once I'm aware, right, and I'm challenging that narrative and I'm now paying attention to my body, I can now ground myself and say, actually, I know that's the message you got earlier,
Right.
but this is actually okay, right? And so we're always ruminating and we're always affirming something all the time, whether this is terrible, this is damnation. That new messaging is very critical, and I think that's a very important piece that people miss. We have to say it's okay, this is safe, this is good, this is intentional, this is divine and sacred, so as to give your body that signal that you're okay and not stay in that sometimes trauma response or stress response.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I also want to recognize and acknowledge that for some people, that's just not doable. So
Right.
if you have a history of trauma, whether that's physical,
Yeah.
sexual, medical, if you've gone through an overwhelming event and you've got a lot of trauma stuck in your body,
That's good.
then this can get really frustrating. So I
Right.
don't want you to judge yourself, and I don't want you to feel shame, because your body is just trying to keep you safe, right? And so sometimes when people they have a lot of trauma stored in their body, and you tell them, well, check in with your body, it's like, well, I don't feel anything. And there may be a certain level of shame that comes with it. There's nothing to be shameful, because probably what happened at some point, you learned to disconnect from your
Yeah.
body in order to survive. So if you know that you have a history of overwhelming events where you felt powerless,
Yeah.
and there was a disconnect that started to happen, then that is when you want to seek out professional help with somebody who is a specialist specifically around trauma, to help your body. So what has happened is your nervous system, neurologically, your brain's been altered and it's stuck there. So working with a professional that can help untangle this trauma to help your body have the release is really critical, because trauma is not something that we can just think positive and
Right.
talk about.
Right.
It's not how it works. It's not
No.
how it works.
Thank you so much for that caveat, because I think that's very, very important. And I'm happy that you were able to catch it, because sometimes the self work, right? The self help work, some people call it self work, self help, what have you, is not sufficient. And when we've had these overwhelming experiences or these traumatic experiences, we do need that extra support. And guess what? As collectivist people, that's okay. We should be leaning into that support. That is not an indication of our weakness. That's poor messaging. That's bad messaging. That's not an indication of our lack of strength, or that we're broken. It just means I firmly believe that we have to heal collectively. And sometimes my healing can be in the context with someone else. And so I hope people don't, if they do have any shame around that, that you'll challenge that narrative and, give yourself permission to be brave, to seek that extra help, because those experiences are traumatic for that reason. When we talk about trauma, we talk about something entering your body, and psychological, emotional trauma is no different from physical trauma. Something entering your body is entering your psyche, your spirit, your mind, that you need support getting out to get back to your baseline. So thank you so much for that.
Yes,
I think that's important.
and so I would say the last thing in sort of exploring is to really give yourself that time to learn your own body, right? Like, so to really learn what does feel good to my body, what doesn't feel good to my body, right? Because again, like I mentioned earlier, kind of waiting for somebody else to understand that or to give you the direction or what have you, become an expert of your own body. So this is also why it's important to self-pleasure, is not just because it feels good, but because you also on a health level,
Yeah.
on a health level, you're like, okay, if something is off, if something's different, to be intimate with my body, I have to really learn my body. right? And to understand it and to be present for it and to care for it. So I
Right.
think a lot of the times we talk about that self-care piece, which is very much connected to our ability to experience pleasure. And knowing that self-care goes beyond the bubble baths and the spa visits, although I love me a bubble
Right.
bath and a spa visit, but really self-care is this ongoing monitoring of my needs, my physical, emotional, spiritual needs. Okay. So I like to think of it as I become the parent of myself, right?
Mm,
So when you see a parent and a child, and a parent who is attuned to the child, who is meeting the child's needs, oh, you're tired right now. You're gonna need a nap. Oh,
that's
you're
good.
hungry, right? And they also set boundaries. You can't have more of this, right? Because when you eat too much sugar, you're bouncing
Right.
off.
That's
Right. So it's like somebody is attuned to the child and helping them meet their needs, anticipate their needs, and helping them whenever, I'm not feeling well, you got to take this medicine. Somebody's tuned in. So we become that for ourselves. And that's really what self-care is. It's an ongoing monitoring of our body, our mind, our spirit, and then how do we meet those needs?
right, right, right. That's so good. I think that's a perfect place to end. I think that being attuned to what we need with the first part of this conversation is just being attuned to our bodies and having intimacy with it. And the second part of this episode of being attuned to what we like, what we feel that's pleasurable to us, to be able to explore it, number one, and then be able to provide it for ourselves is so very critical, because it is connected to well-being. And I think that that is a powerful message that I hope people receive, because when we're able to give ourselves permission to explore, that helps us be more in tune. And when we're more in tune, we're able to actively have that agency to pursue what we need. In terms of sensuality, like what kinds of touch do I need? What kinds of smells do I need? What do I need to see visually to feel that sexual stimulation? What do I need to hear? What do I need to taste if that's part of your sexuality and your stimulation? So I think that there's so many different layers to this conversation, and you have laid an amazing groundwork, Elisa, a foundational framework for us to start. So I really want to thank you for bringing your expertise, bringing your energy, and your openness to be able to impart for other women, Black and brown women, to be able to experience intimacy with their bodies, and then also experience intimacy with what they appreciate sexually to on their path of liberation and well-being. So thank you so much.
I can never turn down an invitation from you. So I am so happy to have been here, and I appreciate you and everything that you are doing to help liberate other women, because I truly believe, in particular, liberating Black women, liberating brown women. It is essential for
Mhm.
all of us to be able to be free. So I love that you are doing this work. You're doing God's work.
Yes, girl, this is God's work. I tell people, my pool pictures looks different these days, but I'm doing God's work
You
still.
absolutely are.
So one of the things that I like to do to wrap up the show is talk about Black women or Black and brown women who are killing it. And you are definitely one of those people who are killing it in the game. So I want you to be able to share with the viewers what your resources are and how they can get in contact with you beyond your social media handle, because I think that you're an excellent resource for us as we continue to pursue pleasure as well as liberation.
Thank you. So you can also check out Melanin and Mental Health, which we are an organization that is not hoping, we are bridging the gap between Black and brown communities and the mental health field, and dispelling all of the stigma and all of the messaging that we have around mental health. So if you go to melaninmentalhealth.com, we have a ton of resources there for you. And also, if you're looking for a therapist, you can go to our directory, which is a national directory, to find a therapist that are from our communities, from the Black and brown communities. You can go there for that. And then as far as my own work, I have my private practice, the Flow and Ease Healing Center, which is in Houston, Texas. So you can go to flowandeasehealing.com to see. I have a pleasure meditation that you can download if you go to flowandeasehealing.com to help you facilitate how to be able to create the space for you to experience pleasure and to get in touch with it. And then you can check out my podcast, Chakras, Sex, and Relationships. So you can find that across, iTunes, iHeartRadio, major platforms for streaming podcasts. You can check that out. And of course, social media.
All right, y'all. It has been an amazing two-part conversation with Eliza Bouqin about intimacy with our bodies, self-pleasure, and self-exploration. I hope that you will give yourself permission to watch this series again. These episodes again, to be able to really take in the information and follow the tips and tools and professional expertise that Eliza has provided. And of course, I hope you'll tune in next time. So be sure to like this episode, subscribe, and share with a friend. And we'll see y'all on the path of a greater version to ourselves next time.